All right, let's get going here. I'll give you a couple of the down and dirty first. We're not going to take a break. We're just going to plow through. But if you have to get up and go to the bathroom or get a drink of water, or you're just tired of us, go ahead and leave. Love it if you come back, but if you don't, we won't be offended. So let's start with this. How many of you have been to the Del Webb Sun Cities Museum? Yay. Holy buckets. Wait a minute. Let's see the hands of those of you that haven't. Okay. Shame on you all. Well, the good news is we have a couple of tickets to give away at the end of this for anyone that is hasn't gone. We'll probably let you in on the drawing because if you've been there, we're not going to give you a chance. So Ben, go ahead. You can start us off as far as who's whom.
Oh, well, maybe I'll stand up. I'm going to sit down part of the day with my little health challenges here. But my name is Ben, and actually Bill's going to introduce me, I guess, a little bit later on. We are going to take you on a journey today through some of the formative years of Sun City. And the plan that really wasn't a plan, the city that wasn't really a city, and take you to some important, what I would call seismic tipping point decisions in Sun City history, for which we still bear the brunt of what those decisions were way back 60 years ago, and where that might take us for the future. There was a purpose, actually, for the little ballots that you got today. We all know it's, I guess, it's election time coming up. Elections are not foreign to Sun City. And the questions that you were asked are not foreign today. They're not foreign to Sun City by any means. So you may have second thoughts about what you answered today. Maybe not. But you're going to learn an awful lot about why we are today like we are. And yes, we are going to take a look at some of the things that didn't go quite as planned or as well as was like along the road. That's the Utopia. Not quite. The mistakes that were made. My first job today is to introduce Bill. Bill Pearson, for those of you who don't know, Bill is not new to Sun City. He and Laurie came here in 2003. Bill has been extremely visible. I don't know if there's probably ever in the history of Sun City, in fact I'm sure, ever been a cheerleader like Bill. Bill has been a non-stop advocate of Sun City and everything about it. He has written somewhere over 1 million words about Sun City in magazines that he's done for the Rec Center, for the Homeowners Association, for the 50th anniversary, anywhere from 16-pager to 8-pagers, 4 pages, 50 pages. He has written forever on talk of Sun City. He has advocated, he speaks out in public, he's been on many boards, so, and he's not unaccustomed to public speaking. So I think you're going to have some fun with hearing what Bill has to say today.
Thank you, Ben. Way nicer than most people say about him. So I met Ben in 2006. He and his wife, Mary Rose, moved here in 1997. So 6 years before we moved here. So he's really an old timer, and he's a lot older, in fact. So I'm 76. He's 83. I know he doesn't look a day over 82. So we met initially at the Sun City Homeowners Association, where we ran for the board and got elected along with a handful of others, and we were there for about 2 months, and we looked at each other and said, this isn't doable, and we fixed it. I mean, we literally rebuilt it from the ground up. It was an interesting process, and it got very ugly and at times, but I think it's paid some long-term dividends, and that the organization is infinitely better than it was when we came. So Ben's background was fascinating. I said to him one time, we were having coffee, and I said, what you do for a living? He said, I taught special needs kids. And I said, oh, that must have been challenging. He said, no, you misunderstand. I taught the brightest of the bright. So special needs to me was kind of a misnomer that I actually bought into, that it was, he taught the brightest kids. And to this day, he still is in contact with many of those kids he taught. Oh, and then along the way, he was a county commissioner in Wisconsin for, what, 23 years? I don't know, a long time. And so, so it was, we've had a love relationship forever. We instantly liked each other, and we've gone to coffee, I don't know, 300, 400 times over our span. And we share Sun City history with a passion that is really strong. I found it interesting, when the museum closed during COVID, how many of you are at Jubilee? 50th anniversary Sun City. It's for sale down at the museum, cheap plug. But inside is a page from the old Highway House coffee shop called Coffee Break. And Ben and I, when we reopened the museum after COVID, Ben and I started doing sessions down at the museum called Coffee Break, and it was fascinating because we just had fun with it. What we came away understanding is that when we put a crowd in a room, it was interactive. It was not just us standing here pontificating for 2 hours, but that if you had questions, it was okay to put your hand up and say, can I stop? We're okay with it. We're perfectly fine with it. You won't disrupt our thoughts because our thoughts are never very consistent anyway. So we don't worry about that kind of stuff. So this session today, we have an end game. We're going to get there. We may have to speed through some slides if we get caught up in some minutia, because what we're going to talk about is really minutia. We're going in the weeds. We're going to make you understand that how Sun City was formed, why it's so successful, was never an easy task. That it was a series of events that happened year after year after year. And the one common thread was that the people that lived here made the decision of where we are and why we are. And if you learn nothing else today, we want you to learn that. So, you want to? There you go.
There's 3 names up there of people who are no longer living that you probably don't even recognize. But maybe somebody does. Is there anyone here that recognizes any of those 3 names? Well.
Barb Wagers does.
Yeah.
Nobody else? Really? Sun City may well not be here without those 3 people. Now here's the rest of the story, Ben.
Well, the top name on the list there is Ben Schliefer. Ben was a New York realtor who visited a couple of uncles who were in like care centers, and they were retired, and they had absolutely nothing to do. And said there's got to be something better way for retired people to be able to fill out their days, and rather than just be sitting around in God's waiting room. And so he thought, I'd really like to toy with this idea, but before he did anything in New York, he moved to Arizona. So he took up the real estate here, and he thought, here would be a place to begin my dream, and he started looking for some people who had some land, and maybe to build a retirement community. Now, the second person you see there was a lady with a land. She and her husband owned 320 acres in something which we now call Youngtown, Arizona. It was a farm, and they were actively farming it until Albert passed away. The third person you see on there, Albert Johns, was their farm manager after Albert died. Later he became the mouthpiece, the salesperson, the organizer for selling lots in what became Youngtown. And actually, Youngtown predates Sun City by 6 years. Youngtown, 1954, Sun City, January 1st, 1960. But Youngtown was very, very different than Sun City. It had no amenities. It had a pond. And eventually, after 3 years, the farmhouse was turned into what they called the Civic Center. That's actually an important name, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. So, with that.
So next up is an important picture, and I suspect all of you in this room know who those two gentlemen are, right? Del Webb is the old guy, and Jim Boswell is the young guy. And they actually came together. So Webb's people were looking around for land. They had watched what happened in Youngtown, and they thought, wow, this could be a potentially, lucrative deal if we could find a piece of property and maybe try and mimic Youngtown a little better. And so Jim Boswell and Robert Johnson were in an investment club, and he mentioned, Jim Boswell mentioned they had all of this land available and would Del Webb be interested. And so they got together and they actually put together a deal that turned out to be unbelievably beneficial to the two of them. And it worked out really good because Jim was a member of the Boswell family, the largest cotton grower in the country and one of the largest in the world. That land here that we're sitting on right now was his. Del bought it for a really good price, and he only paid for it as he went along. So the relationship was formed when the contract was signed in 1959, and it was a 51% Del Webb, 49% Jim Boswell partnership. That the marriage turned out to be something well beyond what anybody had anticipated, because Sun City was called what? The great social experiment. And then, oh, by the way, it would never work. Little did they know. How successful were they, Ben?
Well, pretty successful. There's a reason those guys are smiling. They didn't even know the reason for smiling, because they had good reason. By the time they closed the books on Sun City developed from 1960 to 1978. But by the time they sold the shopping centers, which was the very last things, and 2 office buildings, Boswell, just north of Bell and Boswell intersection, 2 office buildings. They closed the books, and the total profits were $171 million. Back then, $1971. That equates out to $681 million, 2024 dollars.
Wait a minute, $1981.
1981, excuse me. $81.
71, it would have been a lot more.
Oh,
it was a lot less.
1981. So anyway, and then Boswell also sold all the land for $750 an acre. 10,000 acres, another $7.5 million. Why did he sell the land? He had another 210,000 acres. Jeez. I mean, he didn't have it, the family did, he was just running that. But anyway, that's why those guys are looking so happy.
And they didn't even know.
And they didn't know. Interestingly enough, they started out with $100,000 cash, $51,000 put in by Webb. Webb was an enormously wealthy man, big-time builder, big-time farmer. These guys had money. $51,000, $49,000. Boswell lent this new company $600,000. Webb says, I've got a man and equipment. We'll furnish $600,000 in kind, labor, material. We'll use your $600,000 cash, buy lumber, and construction materials, and off they went.
So this is a fascinating slide, and it's interesting because we know that Sun City was so successful by 1961 that the Del Webb Development Corporation, DevCo, which their partnership became, ran off and immediately mirrored the image of Sun City and Sun City in Florida and California. I mean, literally the building, the rec centers were identical, the homes were identical. But they had no plan. They simply thought that if they built it, they would come, and they didn't to those two communities. And so, unfortunately, Sun City fell into that same problem because there was no plan. I've written it 100 times. There was no how to build the age-restricted community for dummies. No blueprint. And as Ben has pointed out numerous times, we became the blueprint for every other age-restricted community that opened. We had none. We simply opened the doors and struggled to find how to proceed. And we'll cover that as we move on, unless you want to touch on something else.
Well, other than there was one plan, and that was to do something where other people who had tried small retirement communities had failed. And that is that they just sold lots, but they didn't have any amenities. And so they decided, Webb and Basel decided, we're going to build the amenities before the people get here. And we'll have Oakmont Rec Center all built, and all the outdoor, the archery range, the croquet greens, the bowling green, the craft rooms, the swimming pool. We'll have it all ready to go, and a 9-hole golf course with the other under construction before anybody even shows up. We'll have a shopping center, all done. Grocery store, nobody living here, population 0. Full stock grocery store, post office. Before anybody lived here, we had a post office. Only time in the history of the U.S. post office that ever happened in the country. Well, wanted to mail out promotional literature. So it was a little different that way, and the whole marketing tool was, forget about your rocking chair. You retire, we want you to have a good time, and we're going to provide you the tools for active retirement. We got them today. Look out the window. Look up the hallway.
So this is a great photo. Anybody that's been in the museum, when you walk in the living room, you see this picture, and then you see adjacent to it is on September 1st, 1959. There was literally nothing. All of that was built in 4 months. So it's an amazing study in how efficient and effective the Webb Corporation was. I always tell the story when I give tours at the museum, that sign that you saw out in front of the museum that says Del Webb Sun City, the slum block sign. In 2010, we were working with Pulte to have that become the new name in front of the building, because we're the Sun Cities Areas Historical Society. Well, we renamed it, and Pulte gave us the rights to it, and they said, hey, we'll build it for you. So that sign, 4 by 5 or so, took 6 months to build. They built the community in 4 months. That's what I always tell people is efficiency.
What you see on here is the beginning. Yes, go ahead.
Can you point on that slide out, are any of those buildings still there to?
Well, I'm so glad you asked.
Almost gone.
Okay,
No.
which
Almost gone.
Well, this is Oakmont Rec Center. Okay. These are the 5 model homes that were ready for people to look at that first weekend. There's the museum right there, in the very first model home. And the other 4. What you see out here, up in the upper corner here, that's Youngtown. And they were looking over here, and they're saying, oh my God. You know, what's going to happen here? This is the shopping center, the first half of Grand Avenue Shopping Center. This was the Safeway store, was right there. Across the street was the motel, the coffee shop, some vacation apartments. And this is Grand Avenue, 107th Avenue. Yeah, real different. You got to think about this. 1960, Bell Road was paved from Scottsdale all the way to 59th Avenue. And it wasn't for years later in Sun City's history that they actually paved Bell Road going through Sun City. So we were out in the boondocks.
And what's so fun for you guys, for us, I mean, this is why Ben and I have such a good time together, because every time we look at a picture, we see something different. Think about Del Webb Boulevard. Where's that done? Oh, wait, it didn't exist.
Well,
It kind of.
well, it was Sandy Trail. You know, that's it called. One of the things that you look at the very bottom, this what they plotted originally was for 1,450 homes. They actually sold the lots in January and February of 1960. I mean, was it accepted? Was it successful? They're thinking, oh my God, what have we created? We got ourselves a winner here. We just maybe hit the jackpot. In fact, when they started planning, they didn't have a name. This whole area around this area here is the first 750 homes. If you live there today, you are living in plot called New Life Number 1. That's the name of your plot. Now the reason for that is because one of the preliminary ideas was, we're going to name this community New Life. Well, it did gain a lot of traction downtown. There's an awful lot of executives working down at Web headquarters downtown, and they thought maybe we ought to have a contest. And so they had actually a nationwide contest awarding a brand new home. That's a pretty nice incentive. That's a lot better incentives than we gave you to put your ballot on, right? Eventually, when you come down to the museum, we'll tell you the whole story about how that ended up with Sun City. Yes?
Those fields, did Boswell farm on those fields then since he was a cotton farmer?
Well, we've got wonderful pictures down there where they were actually building this, and the cotton is growing, and the bulldozers are going through the cotton, whatever. Now, if you go down a little bit further south, down toward Peoria, or actually looking out here, very likely it was lettuce fields. They did some truck farming also, and watermelons and lettuce. Interesting combination. Yeah.
And if you get a chance after class, go up and ask Ben about the boll weevils and the problems that came after. Don't bother.
That's a bug.
It's a bug that is attracted to cotton, and there were massive problems here because the cotton fields were literally outside your door. They could still be farming the cotton, and the boll weevils were there and were a problem for the people living here. Another story for another time.
Oh my gosh, yes. There's so many wonderful, wonderful stories about all those original people here, and when they were still farming, up on the other portion here, and the airplanes were flying over and spraying the boll weevils, and the clouds were running over the people, and they were going to have a rebellion and get the pitchforks, and we had some wonderful history. Well, now we got a question for you. Now, we're Sun City. Well, we're not. Well, if we're not, what the heck are we?
Pretty close, yeah. There you go.
Well, this is what Maricopa County defines it as, which I think sounds a little redundant to me, but they say we are a developed area. Well, that's true. All the lots are filled here, and our current population is 38,000 or somewhere around there. And that we are unorganized.
Some truth in
Well,
that.
it sounds like you're talking about you and I.
Could be a presentation. We'll grade it at the end.
Well, we are unorganized and unincorporated. That sounds kind of the same. But we have no government. Now you think about that one, because I gave that a lot of thought, being in elected government for over 20 years before moving to Sun City. And, the first question is where's City Hall? I mean, are there anyone in the room here that did not live in a city where you had a mayor or something similar? Maybe you live in what did you live with? Go ahead.
In Illinois.
And what kind of an organization did you have? A village or a town or?
Village.
A village, with a village board?
Yes.
I lived in an unincorporated area of a county in Illinois.
Similar to Sun City?
Indeed.
Well, you must have felt really comfortable coming to Sun City. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I lived in Pomfret, Vermont, about 600 people, and the organization was run by 3 selectmen elected for 3-year terms 3 years, and they ran the town. And it was a town meeting where everyone in town would come and vote on the budget, vote on other things that were important to guide the selectmen during the year.
Wow. Anyone else?
Yeah,
Yes,
I lived in a township
a township
in Michigan,
in Michigan.
so it had a township,
You had like a 3-person township board. That's similar to Wisconsin, has a similar system. And there are many different forms, but that's us. No government. Someone else?
Oh, I had lived in a rural county, and the roads were not maintained by the county, and so we had a rural HOA that was all about maintaining the roads. And yeah, with 23 homes, there was a lot of politics.
So what's interesting about this, obviously, is the vast majority of people came here, and you'll see why it matters as we travel down the road. But they came here from a city that had a mayor and a city council and a local city government. This picture, Ben and I shouldn't get together. That's actually, so the first, you guys know it as Oakmont, right? But it was Community Center when it opened. That was the name. And this is actually Community Center in 1960, towards the end of the year. As we were looking at it, we were marveling that almost all of the women had glasses, and of course everybody's well-dressed and in warm clothes and endless suits and ties and dresses. And I mean, that was just, we have 3,000 photos digitized at the museum that are spectacular. I mean, literally spectacular. And those old photos, every time you look at it, you see something different. So when we were looking at it the other day, we started laughing. And I've posted a lot of pictures from the museum on Facebook. And the women always have the glasses on. And I started thinking about it. Why? Because there was no LASIK surgery. There were no contacts. If you couldn't see, you bought glasses. Right? The other thing, glasses make you look really studious, especially those tiny ones. Those are $1 at the dollar store. At any rate, this picture is fascinating because from this, there was the start of a discussion. And Ben, do you want to fill them in on what that discussion was?
Not yet. Not quite yet. We have a lot of pictures to show, and we're going to have to really kind of
Pick it up a bit? All right.
Yeah, we are going to. This is such worth looking at. Just to think about this, some of the mistakes, like the whoops, the Utopia, maybe not quite. The women all wearing coats. You suppose maybe they don't have any heat at Oakmont Rec Center in the winter and in December, The reason we know that is because they didn't have air conditioning either. The rec center was built without air conditioning or heat. There was no heat pump like we know today. Whoops, wasn't repeated, when they built this rec center. The original rec center was here. This is the second time they've built this one. But, it was just a minor error. The kitchen has been added at the back. Bill mentioned about the glasses. Well, you think about this, in 1960, how many eye doctors do you suppose there were in Sun City? How many doctors do you suppose there were in Sun City? How many of these women do you think had driver's licenses? About 1 out of 3. And the nearest hospital was downtown Glendale, with very poor roads, single cars, and about a 35-minute trip. And you talk about being isolated, and the thought really never occurred, but boy, did the developers, Boswell and Webb, get the information in a hurry. We need some medical facilities. The other thing that's really interesting about this is those people had cash. They were not the people that was expected to show up in Sun City. They were expected to be people who were on Social Security maybe, pensions were pretty, not 1960, most people weren't getting work pensions. But these people came with cash in their pockets and paid cash for their homes. About 75% paid cash for their homes when they moved in. And the guy who was the finance director was like the Maytag guy. You know, he didn't have any loan applicants. But they also brought extra cash, because you got to think about this. This is 6 years before Medicare. So you better have some catastrophic funds available that you can get at and access quick. Well, that means banks. 31 banks in Sun City, but in the heyday. Many of those have now been repurposed. But there was a reason. And it was to the point where, you know, when they opened up a new section, there would be a bank on wheels there, waiting to meet them. They couldn't build banks fast enough, so they had a mobile bank because they wanted those funds. Interesting. Last thing is at this meeting, it became the foundation of Sun City. They elected, and now think about this, this is about in the middle of December, first year of Sun City, about 1,500 people now living here. They didn't all fit in here in Oakmont, that's for sure. But they elected 9 of their own people to be their leaders. And they gave them 2 jobs. One, you're going to speak to Maricopa County, to the Arizona Corporation Commission, who's really messing with our water and sewer rates, with the state legislature, with our state senators and our congressmen. And you're going to talk to the developer about, we have some ideas about what we think is important for recreation. You told us we want to shoot bow and arrows. We maybe have some other ideas about what we want to do with our spare time. Those were the 2 jobs, 9. This was what they elected. They were going to represent us in terms of making decisions about recreation. How many people do we have on the rec board today? 9. Think that's a coincidence? Someone decided it was 9 that night.
So this is where this gets really good, because as Ben said, there was no plan. And so when you moved here in 1960, they started moving in the last week of April 1960. And by the end of the year, it got pretty interesting, because we had a bunch of people that moved in that said, I don't want to pay for rec fees. They had no impetus to make them. It was optional. And so 60% of the people paid their rec fees, and 40% down in New Life 1 and Sun City 1, as they were opening, said, yeah, we're not gonna. And that created an enormous number of problems. So they created 2 organizations, and along the way, Webb said, we want to give you the facility. We want to give you a community center. And it wasn't really a gift. He didn't want to be in the rec center business. He had charged a flat rate on every lot sold that paid for everything they built, so it was, the goal was to get rid of it. The outcome, the members that came and voted in that meeting that you saw the picture of said, heck yes, we want it. How'd that work out, Ben?
Well, we're going to find out about that. This is really interesting, because you think about that today. This is such a precedent. I'm so sorry. I'm trainable. Well, maybe. Exactly. Lots of practice. This was such an important decision. This began it all. It's why we now have 8 golf courses. You know, it's why we have 8 rec centers. Because it started with a single decision. They ought to belong to the people. Besides, Webb wanted to build things. He didn't know anything about running recreational facilities. How about if you run it yourself? And, you know, you can pay for it by these voluntary dues we set up. By the way, in case you're wondering about the rec fees, 1960, 61, $1 a month. And 6 out of 10 people paid them. 6 out of 10. The other 4 for reasons, who knows, of their own, I'm sure, decided they weren't going to use the rec, which means they had no access to the swimming pool, to the looms in the weaving room, you know, to the croquet courts, to the lawn bowling. Sorry, but you can't, don't pay, you can't play. And that's what it went. So, it was interesting.
Is that an easy answer to, how could they enforce anything? They weren't an entity.
No. Well, you're getting way ahead of the story, but it's a good question. I mean, it's a good question because how could anyone enforce anything? Because really that answer did not come until 1978. And we're going to get to that in just a minute.
About more than a minute if we don't hurry up.
Okay, so I told another lie. Well, this is great. I mean, this is kind of a current expression. So how'd that work out for you? You hear the young kids talking about that today. Well, how did it work out for taking over that rec center? You think about that. In the first 2 years that the people of Sun City owned the rec center, first they tried to give it back to Devco, to the Del Well. Well, one of the reasons is because they weren't collecting enough money to run it. And the other reason was, another reason was the Internal Revenue Department decided that Sun City was a country club. And at that time, there was a surcharge, a luxury tax for memberships in country clubs, 20% off the top. So for every dime collected, the Internal Revenue confiscated the first 20 cents. So that caused some problems. Next, they thought, how about if we're a country club, how about if we sell it to the pioneers and get out from underneath it? We'll sell it to 1,000 people who are already living here. It's your country club, do with it what you want. That didn't gain much traction either from the people here. Thought it was a bad idea. Next idea, how about if we form a special district, a taxing district, so we can collect property taxes to run it. Illegal in Arizona. Can't do it. Started there.
And then a little later on, well, we could say it now so we can avoid it later. They also said, well, the elected board said, well, let's sell memberships to people living outside of Sun City, and we can fill the rolls that way. What'd you tell me, Ben? 2 people bought it. And oh, it gets better, because the people that were members there were ready to kill, thinking that somebody was going to come in and use their facilities for a price. You know, if you want to use them, move here. It's still an issue. You're exactly right. Nothing's new. I mean, literally, as Ben and I go through our history year after year, the same things that people are chirping about today, they were chirping back then. It ain't new, guys.
Here's something we talk about frequently here in Sun City, and I'll just briefly touch on this. But those people who are living in New Life, number 1, and number 2, remember this about Utopia? Well, not quite. They did not sign a facilities agreement. That's why it was a voluntary payment. There was no facilities agreement. They corrected that immediately for this center, the original Fairway. 7 months, they corrected that, and it's been here ever since. But they left original Oak Barn up there with no facility agreement. I will very briefly touch about 2 other things that were not in the documents. No field facilities. There was not a word in there about age restrictions. None. And that happened not only for New Life number 1 and Sun City number 1 plots, but plot number 2, Sun City, 3, 4, all the way up through 55. Wow. That's the last one, up at Beardsley. None of them, in the original documents, the Sun City had a word about age restrictions.
Which is a shameless plug for the next class we do, covering age restrictions. So it's interesting because, and Ben and I, so when the facilities agreement, and this is, and again, we hear it today, New Life 1 and Sun City 1, came to a $40 per household payment, according to Jubilee. When they opened Town Hall, Fairway, it was $12 per person. Okay, so per lot down there in those first two sections, per person here, and at less money. What does that tell you? If everybody pays, it's cheaper. So, moving ahead.
No, got one more thing, and that is, you answered your question. What else wasn't in those agreements? Who enforces the rules? None. 0 words in there. Doesn't say Del Webb enforces it. Doesn't say the Sun City Civic Association enforces it. There's nothing. Wasn't decided until 1978. With a court case called Sun City Homeowners Association versus Bogans. Interesting all by itself. All more stories. Moving on.
All right. This is where this gets pretty good, and we gave you that teaser about Schleifler and Greer and Elmer Johns and Youngtown. Well, this is where this gets good because, again, everybody looks at what's next door to them and what happened. Well, Sun City opens and we've got all of these problems, right? Well, guess what Youngtown did in 1959 and then in 1960? Go ahead, keep going. We'll blow through these pretty quick because it's only important from the standpoint of what we did following. So, Sun City opens in 60. Right away they explode in sales. Youngtown had been in existence for 6 years, 54 through 60. They're half of our population, and they're right away going, uh-oh, what are they going to do to us? This, I asked Ben to put this in. Ben spent 8 years going through old newspapers. Anyway, yeah, he hates when I say that about him. He worked, anyway, the old newspaper clipping said this: we may wake up and find ourselves helping to pay for a sewer system, a lot of palm trees, a golf course, and other gingerbread wingdings across the road. What was Youngtown afraid of? Being taken over, swallowed up by Sun City, annexed. They were so afraid, within the space of about 14 months, they incorporated.
They had a bit of advantage, the 1960 census. That determined how much revenue they got to run the city. Because in 1950 census, there was nobody living in Youngtown. And so they knew exactly how much revenue you were going to get. But as soon as they got the census data for Youngtown to determine, and they could set a budget, they said, let's talk about this seriously, about getting incorporated so we can protect ourselves from Sun City. Those evil people across 111 families.
So that was put up to a vote very quickly. There was some contention. Obviously, some people didn't want it. But they very quickly voted to incorporate. Was it December 1, 1960? It was right around that time period. 932 yes, 342 no. And they immediately incorporated. So they couldn't be swallowed up by Sun City. So we can keep moving, Ben?
Yep. One thing, I look at the number here, just keep this in mind. All the way back to 1960, I think, the first government class I took at the university, I learned that a mandate was 60% of people agree on anything was considered a mandate. So they got their mandate. We're going to come back to this over and over here today. And they formed a town. Not city, the town of Youngtown. As an incorporated town. The reason for it is they didn't have enough population. It was a population that you had to have at least 1,500 people to be a city. And then when they got to 1,500, they became a city of Youngtown. This is Youngtown City today, but it was that.
So before we move on, let me ask you, how many of you know what revenue sharing is? Besides Bob. All right, so it's going to play an important role. You should know what it is. Revenue sharing is the state collects its taxes, and then they give back to cities a portion of those taxes to help them fund their city government. And so the beauty of Youngtown was, and again it came later, we'll just tell you now, the revenue sharing was so strong that they didn't have to collect taxes for the first 10 years. Now obviously that changed over time. Revenue sharing only funds you to get you started and then levels off, and then pretty soon you're taxing the people that live there. So it'll play an interesting role as we move forward.
In 1961, Sun City was a homeowners association. Started their very first study about should we be incorporated in Sun City. Thinking in terms of this would be a way to solve our financial problems. And looking at Youngtown getting more back in state sales tax than it took to run the city, they thought this is worth taking a look at. And we're going to look at it and look at it and look at it and look at it and look at it.
So shortly after Youngtown became a town, the Sun City Men's Club that was down at Town Hall, our community center, started holding meetings, and they invited, this obviously isn't from them, but it was the elected officials from Youngtown came over and gave a presentation to Sun City Men's Club and their men, the members, talking about how incorporation worked. Because already at this stage there was some buzz about we should incorporate.
We're going to continue on taking a look at incorporation in terms of the studies. Showa, by the way, it wasn't called Showa then, it was the Sun City Civic Association, changed its name to HOA as Sun City, then to Showa, 3 names. Rec Center's got 3 different names over history, hard to keep track of, but interesting. They continue to research, and actually there's a man's name here who's an interesting man, probably would be in the Sun City Hall of Fame if you have a place for gadflies. Name of John Lonnie. But he was really an incorporationist. He thought we'd be far better off, we'd get way more money than we'd ever need to run government for Sun City if we would just get those shared state taxes back here. What we did learn was this, though, is that the population of Sun City in 1960? 0. So, census, the next census, 1970. Well, what if we incorporate now? What's our share? You know? However, there's an escape. Because if you're willing to pay for it, you can have a census redone after 5 years. But you got to pay for it. But they were kind of blown away when they found out the citizens who lived here, what the cost was. And it was a real downer. 17 cents a person.
So what we found from Youngtown's efforts, there was some rules relative to incorporating. There were 2 methods. You could get 67% signing petitions. Interesting story in Youngtown. They had collected enough signatures to do it that way, and then 48 people said, no, take my name off, which resulted in them going out and getting 10% of the population, and then they had to have the election. Or you can use the 10% method. You could only do the vote in even-numbered years. Maricopa County would make appointments. If you voted for incorporation, they would name your first elected officials, and then the next year you would elect your own. The neighbors needed to sign off, so that was the surrounding communities. I think, Ben, you told me 6 were...
We had 6 different communities within 6 miles of our border of Sun City. And we had to, if we were going to incorporate, we had to get a letter from each of those 6 incorporated community saying they had no objection. They had no interest in annexing us, which would be the objection. And so that was needed. And we also learned that to vote, if you were going to vote on incorporation in the early 1960s, you had to have lived in Arizona for an entire year, and you had to have lived in Sun City for 30 days. Those were the requirements then.
So you can well imagine a number of the people that moved in within the last year came from out of state that weren't eligible to vote, which didn't make anybody too happy. So 1963 was interesting because Showa they went all in. And again, I apologize because they weren't Showa at the time. They were the HOA of Sun City. They got behind it, and they decided that this was the solution for Sun City's problems. And it actually covered a myriad of topics that we're not going to go into, but we know there was an issue down at Community Center with non-payment. By then, Town Hall had opened, and Community Center was actively trying to keep Town Hall from organizing because they wanted us all to just buy into becoming a city. Because if we become a city, what happens to the RCSC? Parks and Rec Department, ownership of the streets, police department, all of the trappings that go with being a city now fall under the umbrella of what we enjoy today. So HOA was helping us find the truth, and I don't know, is truth a good word? I think it was a little slanted.
And at the end of 1963, Showa had their annual meeting. In those days, the Homeowners Association and the Rec Center had member meetings every 3 months. It was more like New Hampshire, Vermont type of law, you know, direct democracy. We want everybody there. We don't have room to put everything, so we put up loudspeakers out in the parking lot. They did, you know, big old bullhorns, and everyone participated. And they had the very first, like, what do you think? Should we even think about, like, voting as should we incorporate? And they had a standing vote, and as far as they could tell, it was almost everybody stood up. So we should at least take a vote about that. Sounds familiar, like when you walked in? Let's take a vote. They established, if you're going to vote, you have to establish the border. They decided, here's the borders. Olive Avenue on the south, Grand Avenue, natural barrier, on the north, 115th, that'd be down by the ranches, down at that very southern part of Sun City, 115th, and as you get further up, 111th would be the west boundary, and 99th Avenue would be the east boundary. Later, by the way, they changed that to one lot east of 99th Avenue. Not sure why, but they did that. They established, they wanted to get 100 volunteers to take petitions around, see if people will sign them, asking for incorporation. If you get 2 out of 3 to sign it, automatic city. If you get 10%, at least 10%, mandates a vote, the county would run the election. They would come out and run it. So the first goal was, for Showa was, let's go for 67 cents, 67% if we can, we'll go for 10%. And at that point in time, the flood began. Today I looked at our Monday morning Independent, and there were 2 letters to the editor. It was not unusual back then to get 200, 300 letters with a very small population. Everyone had something to say. They had to add extra pages to the newspaper, but they sold a lot of newspaper to cover the cost.
So it's interesting, and I think it's worth, noting. Those of you that follow the RCSC know that there are 5 open spots this year for board of directors. There's 6 candidates. Those early years in Sun City, when there were 3 separate organizations, one for community center, one for town hall, and one for the homeowners, it wasn't unusual to have 20 candidates for each, with a population that was only in phase 1. People that came here were involved and committed to the process of self-governance, unlike anything we're familiar with today. So when there's some frustration expressed by any of us that have been involved with organizational structure in Sun City for the last 20 years, and you become depressed because you know when people came here, the greatest generation that came here, they got involved in everything. And every decision they played a role in. And nowadays, if we have a vote and we get 2,500 votes, we're going, wow, what a great turnout. No, it isn't. It sucks. Question?
Were they mostly snowbirds or full-time?
I can answer that. It was about a third, it was about the max that they ever recorded. And again, they're mostly just guesstimates. But at the peak, it was about a third of the people were snowbirds. Yeah, a third were snowbirds. Now the question was how many snowbirds or what percentage?
We've always been a higher percentage of permanent residents here,
Yes.
those that are winter visitors. It's fluctuated based on what's going on with the economy. Obviously, when they moved into phase 2 and they started opening more twin homes and garden court apartments, that became another option for people that wanted to come and go, and they could leave it locked up. And not that they're not down here, but there's more single-family homes down this way. And then when you get further out, you see a few more of the optional attached housing.
All right. Anyway, they had this meeting in December of 1963, and if you wanted to get a copy of the report that listed all the pluses and minuses of incorporation, you had to come to the meeting. Well, that made for a tremendous turnout at the show meeting. You know, they had over 1,200 people. That's pretty good compared to what we get today for, you know, annual meetings and things. And it was tough to herd a bunch of cats who all have a different opinion. And it was a bit raucous, but it really kind of set the tone for what happened over the next 8 years, where there were some really interesting things happen. The first estimate was that immediately we probably have to have a tax of about $100 to run the city of Sun City. But you'd save about $150 on sewer and water charges because the city would probably take over the sewer and water instead of having an EPCOR or American Water or what it may be. It would become a city utility. And so you end up actually saving $50 by becoming a city. Was the show board all in favor? No, it was the minority report, so it's like the Supreme Court. You know, the final report, and they were split, but the majority said, let's go for incorporation.
Which gets us to towards the end of 1964. The vote was scheduled for early in December of 64. And as fall came upon us, and I think it was the Barnes report actually, wasn't it? And Ben pulled out the copies of the Barnes report, which was both for and against. Although as I read them again, I'm going, looks like they're all for. It was an odd report because it was really trying to convince people that we wanted to incorporate in Sun City. Well, out of that, a guy by the name of Chris Nielsen creates this new organization that was against incorporation, and they started very late in the fall of 1964 to put out, I'll call it propaganda. I don't know how true it was. He made the argument that our taxes were going to go way up if we incorporated. And when you put that, if you think that 17 cents on a census report was disturbing, start talking about $50 or $100 in a tax increase on your property taxes, and imagine what that does. So people reacted a little bit wildly.
A little bit. I really enjoyed reading about this originally because this became the first of about 15 different anti-groups that formed in Sun City over the next 20 years. Anti-something or other. You know, anti-giving away this rec center property. Anti-smoking. Well, maybe, oh, what an interesting story that is.
Don't start it.
Editors, letters to the editor, more editors.
So the newspaper, as you remember, for those of you that still know what a newspaper is, in 1960, the newspaper was the way you got your news every day. And the newspaper in Sun City was really popular. As Ben said, those letters started pouring in. They made a commitment to publish every letter. So they added extra pages just to get the letters in, because they wanted everybody to have a voice. And initially, the editor of the paper was in favor of incorporation. And then a bunch of funny things started happening. Am I ahead of myself here?
Yeah, a little bit. That's all right.
Okay. So this early 64, I'll bounce back a little bit. All of this impetus is now forming to incorporate. Homeowners is pushing it. The merchants buy into it. Webb buys into it. So much so that he dedicated land for City Hall. Said, I'll give it to you. I'll build it at cost.
And he said, by the way, if we build the city hall, we're going to put a library in it. How about that?
Sound familiar?
That was way back then.
So all of this is now creating this energy to incorporate. And then the fall of 64 hits, the fall fair, huge crowd. This was the real, I think, the thing that set people off. Tax of $419, while current tax is $119. A $300 increase in your property taxes back then caught people's attention. Now, John Lonnie, that Ben mentioned, said this is all hooey, or something like that. And there was no empirical data to support it, yes or no. It was a best guesstimate on everybody's part, and everybody inflated their numbers, but it created such a stir that Webb said, I'll give you the land, but it's not tied to you voting for it. And then the newspaper that had been all in, the editor goes, yeah, no. Which was how we get to the next slide.
Well, as we probably will find next week, it was of interest of people voting. The results, even with all that momentum, it was pretty much said, no way. Here's the results. You see those for yourself. 60% of mandate was like, all right, that was a bad idea, let's put it to bed. For now. Now we got a race.
All right.
So you got to talk about this.
We do. But just so you understand, your vote has nothing to do with the vote you just saw. Because it gets way better. So, okay, for those of you that don't know, in 60, the projection was they were going to sell 1,300 or 1,400 homes in over a 3-year period. They sold that many right away. The explosion happened, they mushroomed. By 64, they sell 387 homes in Sun City. The two communities, Florida and California, are dead in the water. Webb looks to Brain Ashton and Jacobson and says, you got to fix something or we're going to stop. Sun City is not going beyond Grand Avenue. That's it. And so they bring in John Meeker, Brain and Ashton leave, Brain and Jacobson leave. All three of them left, actually. And so Meeker comes in, and all of a sudden everything starts to change. We know from here going south, they start putting the Mediterranean villas that are over there, the bigger homes. All of it started to create energy. Ben has done whole programs on the Sun Bowl and how important a role that played in Sun City as a community. They opened Mountain View, and that's bigger, better than either of the first two. Sales spike, and they decide, we're going to move across, we're going to go north of Grand Avenue, and let's see what happens. So this is one of my favorite signs that we had here. It was an electronic marquee. It sat on the corner of Grand Avenue and 107th, but that side of the road, which was obviously by then not a dirt road any longer, Del Webb Boulevard, right adjacent to the railroad tracks. And it was the new models along the lake And again, I don't know how many of you know it, there were 2 series of models along the lake. The first series was closest to the rec center, Lakeview, which opened, which was huge. Second set was just down the block from it.
First models I saw.
And so the hospital opens, everything explodes. So now we're really fascinated because we have the census from 1970 that shows this huge power. What are we, 12,000 by then? Somewhere in that neighborhood. So we've got a census basis. We know that there's a number out there that's calculable. And the excitement level starts up again because we've now changed from a community that was going to be contained south of Grand Avenue to a community that crosses the tracks and explodes. The rec centers can forge an agreement that consolidates the centers so you can go everywhere. All of those early problems had been worked through, except we still had no city government. Except all we had was what? The rec centers and the homeowners association just out there kind of free-falling with nobody pulling the pieces together. So what was the outcome of that, Ben?
Well, ironic in that. And hey, we got some census data now, it's time that we're going to lose about $1 million in sales tax that's going to Mesa and Tempe and Scottsdale and Phoenix. That's really ours because we're not a city. And that's some real cash. And we need to talk about this again. It's time for another study for about 3 years, 68, 69, 70. And John points out here, we were having a big problem with crime back then. Crime was on the uptick. People who didn't have so much found out that people in Sun City had lots. It became kind of a targeted city. There was wars in the newspaper, verbal wars, won't they? Incorporationists versus anti-incorporationists. John Lonnie, by the way, interesting guy. One of the things he did was the Census Bureau released the boundaries for Sun City they were going to use for 1970 to determine not our population, but our potential taxes if we became a city. John Lonnie said, way too modest. And he laid out, with all of his maps and things, a specific case about why you are going to substantially undercount Sun City. The Census Bureau took a good look at it, and they changed the boundaries to John's. How about that? Hall of Fame type stuff.
So one of the names you saw up there on the slide was John Meade. What was his name? George? George Meade was the president of the Homeowners Association at that point. And Lonnie and Meade...
And the fire chief.
And the fire chief. And so one of the cool things about the history of this community is there's some real characters. And Lonnie and Meade were two of the biggest, most unique in our history. And they were at odds. They were ready to kill each other. And the Homeowners Association had learned a valuable lesson in 1964. Don't push. And so Meade wasn't out there drumming up business, and Lonnie was going at him and so there were dueling articles in the newspaper every week. You know, one saying this, the other saying that, and it got pretty heated, as memory serves me.
Time for another study. 1971, we got the data now. Shaw appoints a blue ribbon committee of 15 leaders of the community to put together this report for the entire community without prejudice. Right. Homeowners had a big meeting, huge public meeting, took a straw vote and said, do you think we should really have a written vote about a straw vote? Not like one of these county votes, just a straw vote about incorporation. See if that mandate against has changed. And they decided yes. Except it was only going to be for show of members. There were 13,000 then, 4,000 now. We'll come back to that. It's the end of the program here. What's the significance of that? Lots of protests. If you wanted to vote, you had to buy a show membership. $2. Protest was a poll tax. Poll taxes were unconstitutional. We found all kinds of things to talk about and argue about. But Showa did decide they were going to set the meeting, they were going to have a vote, that they were going to give out the report at their annual meeting, and then they'd have 2 public meetings after.
So they set 3 special meetings for the report of 15, and the first one went pretty good. They took a couple of questions that had been submitted,
Written only.
written only, so they controlled the narrative. And then I think there was a question from the floor, wasn't there?
That was the second meeting.
That was the second meeting.
Yeah.
And what happened at the second meeting, Ben?
Well, it went fine, and well, they answered the questions that had been mailed in after the first meeting. But then when they opened it up to the floor, the first person that got up to the microphone said, "What's wrong with keeping it exactly the same way we have it right now?"
All right, wait a minute, let's cue the chant. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Come on, join in. Nothing, nothing.
1,200 people in unison, including half of the people who are sitting up on the stage who were members of the show board, which was rather interesting. And then it got really uncontrollable at the microphones. They had 2 microphones out, and there were people pushing and shoving each other, particularly if they were not.
Push me. See, it's much
That felt really good.
Get up.
But anyway, it was quite something. And the third one was pretty much exactly the same. And these were held really close together, like a week apart. First the peaceful meeting, then the first explosion meeting, and then the second explosion meeting, and then they had the vote. And that all happened, bang, 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 bang. Showa asked did one about this kind of strange. They decided they were going to actually ask 5 questions. Instead of just saying, should we incorporate or not? They're going to, I hope you can read some of that at least. But there was the first question, looks very similar to what you filled out for the very first one. You know, it was, do you favor continuing to have Sun City governed by Maricopa County, our present local government governing body, indefinitely? Second question, do you favor having an official vote on incorporation? Third one was, do you favor further study, and we voted in 1974 instead of 71, or how about 76? Or how about when we finish building phase 2? Well, here's your answer if you're looking for mandates. I never really realized about voter fatigue until I looked at this more closely this morning when I was looking through some notes. Look at the difference in the voter participation just between question 1 and 2. We lost about 300 people who only voted for number 1 but not for number 2. And the third question, more drop off. And they just keep dropping off as they go along. In case you wondered what voter fatigue meant. Well, that was your answer.
So the question was asked and answered quite emphatically, wasn't it? We don't want to incorporate. And unfortunately, and it was pointed out repeatedly by people in the press, people that lived here, of local organizations, why the hell did you write such a poorly worded question? I mean, literally, it was just dumb. So the editor of the paper said, why don't you just, as Ben said, why don't you just say yes for incorporation? No, I don't want it. It made no sense. We actually took the questionnaires first portion, which is what you voted on.
First two questions.
First two questions, we didn't include all of the minutiae with it. Because we just wanted to see how you guys would respond to a question of should you incorporate or shouldn't you? In 1971, they said, we don't want any part of incorporation. And so what I need you to understand when we sit here and talk about self-governance, which is what we are, we're self-government. We run ourselves. We don't have a mayor. We don't have a city council. We literally take ownership of the process of running ourselves. SHOA does their thing, the RCSC does their thing, each of the various, and we'll cover this in a minute, but from not having a government making our decisions, and not city planning department, a parks and rec department, all of the pieces that go into making a city aren't there, what are you left with? You got a bunch of holes. You got a bunch of, they should do, no, there is no they. There's us. There's us. And so, is that next slide? There it is. So that us, we need to fill in the holes. Take a look at that. It's staggering. We reinvented ourselves when we didn't have a city government. We said, we'll build all of these pieces to take ownership of the community at large. Now, some of them have gone away, but a lot of them are still around, and a lot of them are going strong because people that moved here decided that when they came here, they'd be a part of the process of self-governance.
I listed a few of the organizations that are central and essential for us to continue living as we know life today. And separating out at least a couple of them would be interesting as to what the future would look like. Look at that. I'm sure I left some out. That's why the question mark up there. And some of them are maybe more central to importance than others. Certainly, you know, the homeowners association, the rec center for sure, the homeowners, condominium owners association. But there's others. The posse. We had to have a posse. But we didn't have our own police department. We needed a supplement. We had to have the prides because the county was giving us 3.5 workers for 121 miles of streets. We had to have the Sun City Homeowners Association Foundation to paint 21 miles of walls because Tommy says it matters. We didn't want to leave the homeowners do it. They all decided I want mine rainbow and I'm going to paint a turkey on the side of the wall. You know, so we had to virtually invent all of these. And they all play an important part somewhere in our community. Result of not being a city. So, is our history important? I don't think so. But I think we are at the point where monitors, did you total up what we said? Yeah, let's bring it up for Bill. Good work, Mr. Pearson.
All right. Do you favor continuing to have Sun City governed by Maricopa County, our present local governing body, indefinitely? 32 yes, 12 no, 3 blank. Do you favor having an official vote by residents on incorporating and forming our own government? 20 yes, 25 no. Yeah, it is, to the degree that, you know, in 1971, they said 95% no, let's stay the way they are. And so where I always am intrigued by this, I came to the Showa annual membership meeting, and you know, the questions always get asked, why don't we have our own police department? Here's why. How about, who does all of our enforcement? Nobody. Showa. So where did those CCNRs come from, Ben? In what year?
Well,
I know, you were comfortable.
I did. I just was starting my power nap. Well, it's my turn here pretty soon. I see some of you already going in. I'm envious. Really. Seriously. We never got any wordage. Well, let me back up. Age protection came in 1984.
Wait a minute, let's repeat that for those of you that think enforcement of our age restrictions matter.
1984. 24 years. We had an imaginary age restriction. The same restriction that Youngtown had. You no doubt had, like when I was here, I think within the first 2 or 3 years, I was told 8 times, you know, that Youngtown lost their age protection. They never had age protection. It was imaginary. It never made it into their documents. People were just told you got to be 50. You can't be under 18. And that's what they told. They sold everybody in Sun City with that. In 1984, we went under the county's enforcement of age restriction for our entire borders, all the way from Beardsley to Olive, 115th Avenue to east of 99th Avenue.
Barb's got a question before I go on. Barb.
Yes.
So in '64, if we had incorporated, would we have been forced to have schools here?
Maybe.
Well, that's a completely different question, because city government and school districts in Arizona are not the same borders. You know, they don't do the same function. It's not the same. And the answer is no, we wouldn't have. And that's a whole class,
I know that.
you know, about why we had a school district, why we have this Sun City School District for 46 days. 46 days.
What?
Yes. That's a whole other class.
Yeah.
It's fun.
So this is
It's fun.
where this gets so intriguing. Barb's question is spot on about what would have